Those of you who have listened to this podcast for a while know that I have a few books of the Bible that are my favorites. Yes, to some people's surprise, even us progressive Christians, actually, many of us, I should say, do love the Bible. For me, I absolutely love prophetic literature, especially the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah. And obviously, I love the Gospels. But if I was pinned down and I had to choose one book of the Bible as my favorite, it would be the book of James. Now, before I read Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited and started using his definition of defining myself, I might say, as a follower of the religion of Jesus, I would have described myself as a Jamesian Christian, a Christian who live by the framework of much of what we see written in the letter of James. And so James chapter 1, verse 22 says, "You must be doers of the word and not only hearers who mislead themselves." This verse has always stood out to me, and is probably a big reason why I became an ethicist, as someone who wanted to understand the actual implications, the ethical implications of our theological understandings, like the practical theologies that we live out. I love what it goes on to say in chapter 2, where it says in verse 14, "My brothers and sisters, what good is it if people say they have faith but do nothing to show it? Claiming to have faith can't save anyone, can it? Imagine a brother or sister who is naked and never has enough food to eat. What if one of you said, 'Go in peace, stay warm, have a nice meal'? What good is it if you don't actually give them what their body needs?" In the same way, faith is dead when it doesn't result in faithful activity. For me, both of those passages have always captured what I believe to be the essence of Christian practice. But I feel as though, to some extent, we are living in an era of zombie Christianity, where we have large swaths of people who claim to be Christian, who have turned aside from the Holy Spirit that should animate their faith and move them to clothe the naked and to feed the hungry. And instead, they send their thoughts and their prayers, and they tell them to go someplace and stay warm, to go in peace and stay warm. One can only do this so much until the part of you that actually animates your faith begins to atrophy and maybe even die. While this failure to love our neighbor is bad for all Christians, it is especially poor when it is the behavior of our elected officials. But thankfully, times are changing. We are seeing the rise of young leaders, of progressive leaders, and Christian leaders respond to a call to run for political office. And while many of them have always been doers of the word, they have decided to shift their work to the political sphere so they can have a broader impact. In today's episode, we are interviewing one such person today, Joanna Whaley. She is running to become a state representative in District 2 in Michigan. She is a progressive Christian, and her platform reflects the words of James. Moreover, Joanna has not always been a progressive Christian, and her journey is one that I think will resonate with all of us, and perhaps maybe even inspire you to get involved in your own local politics. Thanks for joining us, and let's get to the show. Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians, and not the kind who would start a war just a few days after convening the inaugural meeting of a board of peace. So, if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I'm your host. I'm a professor of theology and the lead pastor of the Loft Faith Community in Los Angeles, California. And today I am delighted to be joined, just back with the political trinity, Everest.
Hey.
And Wesley is back.
Hello, we're back.
Yes. So before we get into the bulk of the episode, I want to invite you all who are listening to become a supporter of our podcast. If you like our podcast, we really would love if you could become an official supporter of the Progressive Christians podcast. You can find a link to make a tax-deductible donation in our show notes. A one-time donation would be great, or you could sign up to be a monthly supporter. Now, we chose the supporter model because we didn't want to deny anyone access to the additional content we are creating, and we are indeed creating it. But in order to continue this ministry, we really need your support. So if you could please support us, that would be amazing. So, as I said, in today's episode, we will be have a conversation with Joanna Whaley. Joanna is a former evangelical pastor who came out as a trans woman who has advocated for the LGBT community ever since. She is currently running for a seat in the Michigan House of Representatives. Joanna, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. The political trinity. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, leaning into the religious aspects as well. So
Love it.
yeah,
No pressure.
Yeah, I know.
Well, we also don't take ourselves that seriously, but
exactly. I know.
So.
We really don't. Although I do think if we were in charge of the politics of our country, things would be a lot better. But
we'd be much more serious about it. Absolutely.
Exactly. Honestly, I was delighted to have you on the podcast in part, and I have to just kind of full disclosure for people to know, I am from Michigan, as some of you probably have guessed, or because I've talked about it before. And so when someone emailed me from Michigan, and another Michigander was like, "Hey, I'd love to partner with y'all," it immediately just piqued my interest. And the more we did research, we were just excited about your campaign, what you're trying to do. And so that is a huge reason why we wanted to have you on to talk, but also because, again, we think your journey really, I think a lot of people can relate to what you've kind of gone through in your own growing. But before we get to the specifics of your own journey, there's so much that's happening right now. We want to at least spend a few minutes talking about the military conflict with Iran. And so what are your thoughts on the war with Iran? And like, if you were elected, Joanna, like, what would you actually, like, how would you speak about this to the people in your community?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you for, even having that conversation, because I think it's really easy sometimes to just put our head in the sand and forget about it. And Christians and churches like to do that and just kind of stick to their series and not talk about what's going on, right? But my district is just south of Detroit and neighbors one of the highest Arab populations on earth outside of the Middle East, which is Dearborn, Michigan. So we neighbor, and one of the cities in my district named Melvindale is no different. It's a very high population of folks who have fled persecution from around the world and found home here in the States. There's a lot of our neighbors that are just hurting right now. A lot of it feels like death by 1,000 cuts. First we're coming after people for coming here to seek a better life, and now we're bombing their home. And it just is something that grieves my heart. I believe it grieves the heart of God. I believe war grieves the heart of God, no matter how you identify God and what faith background you come from. I, as a Christian, I loathe war. And I think we should live at peace with one another. And I definitely loathe war being blanketed in peace. When we're using the terms of peace to say we're doing this for your own good is really manipulative. So we have many people in our community who are hurting right now and they feel exploited. And do we like some of the human rights abuses that may have been going on in certain places of the world? No, we don't have to stand for those things, but also our country really believes in a gospel of war and peace by bombing. And I'm against it fully. I've been somebody who will not shy away from these questions, especially when it comes to nations like Israel, who have been committing genocide in Gaza and in the Middle East in general. And there's complex issues on all sides of this. But we have a tyrant in the White House who is hell-bent on war and blanketing it in the name of peace. So I stand unequivocally against it. At the state level, there's only so much you can do, but you are gifted with a platform to speak and to represent your people. And that is something that I will do as the next state representative here, to say, I see you, and I'm going to speak for you, even if, you may feel nervous to speak up right now, especially with the threat of immigration enforcement in the area. I will speak on your behalf. And so I'm appalled by it, and I will be loud and use my voice any way I can to say that this is gross.
No, that's so helpful, because there are so many people who are nervous to speak out, who feel as though it threatens their status. I have colleagues in the academy who have fundamentally changed how they teach because of their status, right? Even though they're tenure track professors. And the infringement upon free speech by an alleged group of people who want to claim to be about free speech, to me, is just this deeply ironic. One of the things a question I guess I want to ask you, and I feel like this can allow us to get into a little bit more about your background in history, is and we'll put this in the show notes to everyone. By the time you listen to this podcast, you probably would have heard that some of the arguments that the military leadership are using to justify the invasion of Iran is tied to biblical notions of the rapture. Yes, we are using rapture theology to justify conquest. So there's an article in Huffington Post that you can read, but there was essentially a bunch of complaints that came in where soldiers were saying that for some U.S. commanders, engaging the emerging war in Iran is part of a biblical plan to bring about the end of the world as we know it, according to complaints filed by over 100 service members. The Military Religious Freedom Foundation received a litany of complaints about religious ideology seeping into military orders since the U.S. and Israel began bombing Iran. I know it said something about raising some flag. I didn't grow up in any of this stuff, so I wish I could remember specifically the way they were framing it. But it's something about a horn and I don't know, man. So I know, I feel like you know more about this than me.
The shofar is being blown, right? It's the horn. You hear the horn, and that is the sign of Jesus riding in on the clouds, right? That is the imagery that is being pushed forward. You can see it in a lot of military and recruitment imagery. They're trying to use a lot of this stuff. This really is foundational to what we've seen from the Christian right for so long. We have seen over and over the use of religion to justify egregious action. And this is just a way for them to feel, and they really believe that it is their responsibility to bring Jesus back to earth. We'll get into this, but like in the Seven Mountains Mandate, right? There's this imagery and there's a belief that, okay, we live in such a connected world now. We've preached the gospels to each end of the earth. Now we just have to usher in an environment to bring Christ back. This is what, when Christian nationalism takes root and gets into the military, this is how it actually becomes dangerous physically for people. And we're seeing it right now. I mean, you said over 100 service members have filed this complaint. That is alarming, right? That's not just some rumor. This is real. And they're playing with people's lives when it comes to this stuff. And John Darby's full of crap, by the way, for those who listen to the show. Like, Darby basically made up the concept of the rapture. And my question is, and the thing that I would challenge people with is be like, okay, if you believe in the rapture, what do you believe then? Are we pre, post, mid trib? Like, depends on where you live. If you live in Iran right now, you're going to be a post tribber, right? Like, the world's on fire around you. But if you're living in America, sitting in your cozy home, listening to your podcast, driving to, get your third cup of coffee for the day, listening to us, you're in pre-trib, right? Like, it's a mess. The concepts of these things come from, I call it a nasty game of telephone and religion. It comes from, I heard this from my pastor, who heard this from their pastor, and I heard it from my Aunt Janet, who shared a meme about this, and I now believe it. Look, I'm going to argue in all the comment sections that Jesus is coming back because we're at war. And every single war in the Middle East, from the dawn of time, from the second I became an evangelical, every time a bomb dropped somewhere in the world, someone was like, this is the end of the world. And we've been doing this since the very beginning. We've been doing this since Jesus died, right? Like, people have been, oh no, this is it. No one knows the hour, right? Like,
Well,
and
I think that's what I want to say. Like, That's what it says. I always it blows my mind. I'm like, for people who want to claim to be taking the Bible seriously, where, in Matthew, was it 24:36? But nobody knows when that day or hour will come, not the heavenly angels, and it just anyway.
Right. But
It's crazy.
Pete, Fox News Pete, congratulations. We're so proud of you.
Wesley.
Yeah, I think that's where, I mean, I didn't grow up evangelical. I grew up in the fundamentalist tradition, Church of Christ, so different type of crazy, in my opinion. But the question that I've always had is, how do these things become so central in like the white evangelical experience to where someone who isn't even connected to Christianity has this understanding that there are people in the Christian tradition who believe that they need to usher in Jesus' second coming, and in doing so will destroy the world and everyone else's inhabitants other than the followers? Like, how does that become so? I don't want to say mainstream, because it does feel like it's something specific to evangelicalism, but it at the same time is a dominant character of versions of evangelical Christianity.
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that question. And I really do believe, I should give some context of the types of evangelical environments I worked in my whole career. I became a minister at the age of 17 in one of the largest mega churches in Michigan. These are like smoke machines, like lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, like every Sunday, right? Like that's the type of church I came from. I worked at the largest church in America with like celebrity pastors as guest speakers, right? Like that's the type of environments we were in. What's happening and what has happened in the evangelical space, really since the Willow Creek movement, has been the celebritification of pastors and the elevation of their authority to be unquestioned. I really do believe that what's happening in the evangelical space is, if I heard it from my pastor, it must be true. And the culture that happens in many of these spaces is, if you question, you are trying to sow division. And you have to sit under this teaching, like it or not, because that person on the pulpit is preaching the truth and you can't question it. And that's the culture that has happened. I think that we have elevated the pastor as the voice of God in the evangelical space, and we have not allowed for any other questioning. It's literally what Martin Luther fought against, right? It's what he fought against, to say this is not right. We have to be able to like hear from the voice of God ourselves and ask questions. But we have made celebrities out of our pastors. Even if they're not celebrities, right? They have this power and authority that goes unchecked. And the thing is that many people are showing up to church. This was a long time. This is a Pew Research said that I think regular church attendance is once a month or once every 6 weeks. If you're showing up once every 6 weeks in a church and the pastor gives some beautiful sermon, the pad starts rolling, right? You got the keyboards going behind, and he just starts saying, he could literally sell you anything. Evangelical pastors are really good at like convincing you, right? This is a problem that is happening, is that we have people that just are taking blank advice from their pastors and not asking the questions. And the whole culture has turned that way too. Like, if you ask any questions, you're instantly being lied to by the devil. Everything is spiritual warfare. And so there's a lot of spiritual coercion that goes into it. And folks, they're not like, going out and saying, I'm going to coerce these people to believe this terrible thing, but I believe it because my spiritual mentors taught me, and I kind of have to hold this line and I have to push this forward because that gets the cheers and that gets the crowd coming back every week. And so, yeah, you do a 6-week sermon series on Revelation, you get the right environment, you can convince everyone that Jesus is coming back tomorrow. And that's what's happened. We've elevated, this makes all my evangelical friends really mad. We've elevated the pastor and we've elevated the actual Bible to be like the only thing that we can trust, right? And like, when you put those two things together and they're the only things you can trust, you can't trust your brain, you can't trust your mind, you can't trust reason anymore, because that's the world, that's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's why we have so many who just blanket believe this stuff. And yeah, it took me a long time to figure that out, being in the middle of it.
I think, and then ever someone toss it to you after I say this, to me, the tension that you've identified, that I actually think we can go back beyond Martin Luther. I mean, this is the beginning of Moses. Like, this is Mosaic religion. The ancient Israelite religion is founded on this premise. You know, the Ten Commandments, the first three commandments are about making sure that no one believes themselves to be God, that the Pharaoh's not God, that we believe in a free God. And what you are describing is a way in which, while they would not say it, but when you give someone unquestioned authority and they're not held accountable, you are elevating them to a God. You're making them a God.
Yeah.
And you are actually worshiping the Bible if you don't understand that it's an edited volume that is a part of God's revelation, but not the entirety of God's revelation. And so you are, in my opinion, and I'm an argument, I would say this is not an opinion, this is an argument where you are worshiping an idol. And I think this, for me, stifles the way in which the Holy Spirit actually works within us. And so what you're saying is, oh, they're told not to ask questions. You think it's, you know, because you're sowing division. Well, this is why we call ourselves or believe ourselves to be created in the image of God. There's something within us. Like, there is a part of us that speaks our conscience. Like, this is the Spirit speaking to us that prompts us to seek and to ask questions. And to shut that down is to, I would argue, disconnect you from something within you that's pulling you towards love, that's agitating you to ask a question that perhaps you've had to shut down. So
Right.
I want to make sure we get to some. Oh, go ahead, Joanna, and then I'll toss it to Everest, because I know you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, it just the way that we have allowed human beings to have the final authority on our spiritual processing is a major root issue that we find ourselves in. And you're right, it's been a long-standing problem. And so I'm thankful that we're talking about it.
Well, I want to ask you, that was a really wonderful and like sensory description of kind of what those spaces feel like. I'm so curious. I guess I have a two-part question, which is, first, what was it like for you being kind of a leader and a facilitator of that space? I think a lot of us know what it's like to be in kind of those audiences and to be in those rooms and to like have our heartstrings being pulled at, to have the keyboard playing. But what was it like for you to be a leader in that space? And then second, hearing kind of how all encompassing that was and that culture was, if there is a moment or a few greatest hits of moments that kind of, to use our queer language, like cracked your egg a little bit, but cracked your conservative theology egg.
Yeah. And I try to be really, sometimes I can come off really harsh against some of the things I experience in evangelical spaces, right? But I do have to also realize that they were really genuine beliefs that I was doing something in the world that mattered. And honestly, like, it did matter. The things that we did, like the way that I lean on Philippians, saying whether it was out of pure or false motives, the gospel went forward, right? Like, I do look back on those times and I think, those moments when the keyboards are going and you're hitting the point and the people are crying in the front row and the hands are raised to accept Jesus, right? Like, those moments were really powerful. And they were moments where it felt like, oh my gosh, like the Spirit of God is in this room, like tangible. Like sometimes you could feel it, right? And it was honestly, like, at times it was an honor to be involved in that work. But the things that started to shift for me were political. So I was working at a big mega church in the state of Michigan, one of the biggest ones in the state. I want to say somewhere around 20,000 people a weekend at our church, multiple locations. And I remember it was after Trump got elected and it was gearing up towards the 2020 election cycle, right? I started to hear some stuff, especially when the elections were coming closer and closer. I started to hear people that were my spiritual mentors. I began to start hearing them spout conspiracy theory. And that began to not settle in my spirit in the right way. What happened is that I kept hearing it over and over. I'm like, these are people that taught me what truth is, right? These are folks that I sat with for years and worked out my salvation with them, right? Worked out my faith with them. And they were beginning to say things like, this election is rigged. This, they would start saying things. There's this evil cabal, and they were getting into like QAnon, which is kind of true now, but like, we're learning a lot of things. But I started to watch these things play out and watching my mentors falling for conspiracy theory. And I began to ask some pretty big questions of my own faith, but I knew I was not safe to ask them out loud. I began to ask the questions, what have I been taught was true that actually they didn't have a clue, right? What did they just parrot from someone else? And that's what began to start unraveling my like conservative thought process, because I think it's really worth saying, like, I was bought and sold on the Christian nationalist moment. I believed that the world was evil and trying to turn us all gay and like, trying to get us all through our TVs, that Satan was trying to come in and that's why I struggled with my gender my whole life. Like I believed those things, right? But it was really getting up to the 2020 election began to really move it for me. And then on January 6th was a big moment, especially when I started seeing the Christian flags being flown at the Capitol. And then what really got me was there was a Sunday morning I'm at church, and mind you, COVID raging, and many in the church were just super angry that we had contact precautions and we're being, they're like, you all are being so woke, and all this language started to show up in our congregation that I had never heard before. I had never heard this type of language, that explicit language that was so politically tied to like the Trump administration. I had never heard that in the church building before. And I started to hear it. And I just remember one Sunday leading worship, rooms going, keyboard, beautiful music, cool lights. And I was singing that morning. And I just remember thinking to myself, I am really angry at each and every person in this room.
Wow.
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 Mm-hmm.
Like I had a moment where I was like, I cannot lead these people anymore. And it began to, it ate at my heart and my spirit so much. So I just, it was in that season, I just kept asking more and more and more questions. And ultimately, because I asked those questions, it knocked over the domino of my own gender identity that I had wrestled with. It should be said that I'm a 15-year survivor of conversion therapy. I was forced by my church environments to endure conversion therapy. So I believed there was something wrong with me, that God wanted to heal me. And it was in this season when I knocked over all the theological dominoes that my own freedom came unwrapped, and it became mine in that time.
Wow. I mean, I think that's I so much. But I know there's Everest. I know you have another question. All I wanted to say is just in brief to the response about the tension that I can't imagine of leading a congregation and then knowing that something within you is telling you that you're frustrated about what's happening and you feel as though something on here is fundamentally off. And that's that
Yeah.
anger that was rising within you. And I mean, you can't lead from that position. Some
No.
people are able to suppress it, but you can't be authentically leading from that position because it will eat you up. Everest, I think you can ask the if that's okay,
Well,
the follow-up question.
yeah, I really appreciate that answer. And I think you kind of spoke to this, but I had kind of like a chicken egg question, which came first. Sorry, I'm making a lot of egg jokes today, but
Well, egg prices are down, so the economy's doing great.
That's
so.
how we know.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's exactly
We're
how
back.
we know. Yep, we're
Yeah.
back. I'm vegan, so I don't even care. But whatever, go ahead.
But I was gonna say which came first, kind of the queerness of the progressive theology, and
Yeah.
think based on hearing what you just said, I am curious if it sounds like the outside bigger political forces were kind of the catalyst of putting you on the path you're on now.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I tell people all the time that my transition, my gender transition was about 90% theological. It's about 90% theological and like 10% physical, what I saw and how I presented to the world. And some of the things that, it always stung when folks would, say that I was making some like sexually deviant decision in my life, right? It was hard to reconcile because I had been spending years just unfolding so many harmful theologies that were keeping me in the closet. And I think that work went on and on and on. The thing that broke it for me was I actually ended up calling the youth pastor that had initially been a part of sending me to conversion therapy. And he had stopped pastoring and was, kind of himself on a journey to becoming a much more progressive Christian. And I called him. I said, "Hey, I have to ask you a question." Because I had been for years. I mean, I'm not saying this to like, oh, look at me, look how much I read the Bible, but like for probably 8 months, I read like all the gospels every day. Like and I was like, God, show me that I'm okay. Show me that I'm safe to be me. And I read the gospels over and over, whether I was listening to it on the Bible app, which I worked at the church that created the Bible app, so I had to use it. So over and over, I kept asking that question. And I remember on the phone, I was in the clubhouse of the apartment complex we were living in at the time. And I asked him, if I come out and transition, am I going to go to hell? And he said, absolutely not. And that was just a moment where I was like, wow. I had been getting confirmation from my spiritual journey, from a therapist that I was seeing, that I was going to be okay. But to hear it from one of the sources of where a lot of the pain began, to hear that I was going to be okay, that was just a moment of like clarity. So it was like, honestly, like 90% theological, which actually is the reason I got fired from my job. I was processing all of this in a journal and left it on my desk one day at the church, and someone read it and reported it to the board of pastors, and I got fired 3 days later.
No.
Like a violation of privacy. Just
right. But good to know, in all 50 states, you can be fired for your gender identity or your sexual orientation in a religious 501c3. Good to know. Good to know.
Dang.
It is wild what we allow religious organizations to do to people under the guise of their religious freedom. That has been such a strange reality to exist in.
Can we think about that for a minute? We are allowed to discriminate by law in religious spaces. There's something deeply wrong with that.
Or deeply American, because if we remember,
I mean,
I'm like, yep, all right. I'm like, we know. All right, Wesley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you were clearly like steeped in all of the things that make it difficult to come out to accept your true self. Like, not only are you pastoring, but you're, I would imagine, totally aware of the clobber text and the different texts in the scriptures that sort of point you in a direction of not stepping into your true self. And I think one of the things that Everest says this many times, that a queer Christian in a Christian space is no accident, or something to that effect. That there's purpose
no such
there.
thing as an accidental queer Christian. That's the thing I say.
Yes, absolutely. So in that vein, like how did you come to make sense of your faith and your true self?
Yeah. Well, there was a few things that happened. One, there were a few pastors that were really instrumental in that process for me. As I said, this was a theological process, and I met 3 pastors in this process, one of which I worked at their church after coming out, and then the other one from a church in Toledo, Ohio, very good friend of mine still today, and my current pastor of my church that I attend fully online, and that is by choice. That is not because of proximity. It's literally by choice. I think it's the best thing for me to be in my church online right now because of my history in the church. But my pastor, Josh Scott from Grace Point Church in Tennessee, I had a great conversation with him, and he said to me, Joanna, you are not a problem for God. And that was just like a really powerful statement, has always stuck with me. And, to even know that there were churches out there, because in the evangelical bubble, you don't even know that there are affirming churches. Like, they make you think that that's not even a thing. And so, like, my eyes started to open up a lot about, like, oh my gosh, there's these places that are going to affirm my faith. And so I really, my church has been very instrumental in that, in my like spiritual foundation rebuild, because everything came tumbling down, right? And I was not really ever satisfied with just like, God is love, we fly a rainbow flag and everything's cool, like kumbaya. Like, look, that's beautiful, and I do speak and I share and I visit lots of churches like that. But like, I needed someone to kind of like kick my butt with some like really intense stuff. And so my spiritual foundation and community has been really instrumental in that for me, and rebuilding. And also, I think my journey, I thought my work, honestly, like staying involved in ministry helped save my faith, because I was getting ready to like give up. There were moments where I'm like, do I want to give up on this? And then I discovered this thing called clinical chaplaincy, where, because I thought that I wasn't going to be a pastor anymore. And I'm like, well, I've had my whole identity wrapped up in that. Right. And now I'm undoing identity and rebuilding it. And so staying connected to the church has been really instrumental for me in my faith and moving forward. And then I'll leave this. I started to discover different types of theology within Christianity, because my environment, the evangelical environment, sells you one truth. There's only one way to think about all of this, right? There's one answer. Now, we might give some grace for the Calvinists and the Arminians. We might allow that disagreement, but everything else has to be really centralized and streamlined, right? But then I discovered 3 different types of theology that really shaped how I see my Christianity and how I held on to it. The first one was liberation theology, which you did a whole episode on, which was beautiful, by the way. Yes, go South America. We love our friends
Gustavo Gutierrez, yeah, definitely.
Yes, everyone. Like, they're all from South America, basically. But like, I was just really taken by liberation theology. Then I discovered, once I cracked open the door of liberation theology, then I discovered queer theology. I'm like, what is this crazy thing, right? Like, wow, retelling the stories from a queer lens, like, what a concept, right? And so liberation, queer, and then open and process theology began to open it began to open my fists of needing to be right. And it helped me have a Christianity that asked more questions than it needed answers to. And I really think those 3 things once I learned that there's more than one way to think about, this life as a believer, it really began to like save my faith for me.
I mean, I think, Joanna, so much of your story, it speaks to just the things I've learned from this community, specifically from Everest and Wesley, but also just the community. I did not grow up in a community where people, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. You're still dealing with a lot of, especially in West Michigan, a lot of homophobia, a lot of queer hate. And I think it's not that there weren't queer people around. There were. People listening to this podcast know that my dad is gay and came out when I was in high school. And so I lived with a queer person most of my life, or a good chunk of my life. I'm actually not most of my life now because I'm old. But anyway, that's another thing. So there's a way in which I think you're wrestling with the text. You're consistent, as we would say, defining, constructive theology as faith-seeking understanding. I know, Everest, you've pointed this out before, that so many queer people, are some of the most, well, like, they know the Bible. Like, there's been times where they've been like, I need to figure this out, and so I'm going to keep reading this until I figure it out. And because
There's
you
a
can't take
joke
it for
that's
granted.
like, if you want a PhD in theology, either get a PhD in theology or be a queer Christian.
Yeah, that's
They
the
all
gay
got
agenda right there. Just
they
be
know
gay.
so much about the Bible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just be gay. It'll be fine.
Yeah. But no, I just think like even the commitment that you had to engage the Bible in the way you've discussed it, like
Yeah.
I think one of the things that always stuck out to me is the genuineness of so many people within that evangelical Christian's faith, and I think that's a part of the reason why I can engage with folk from more of a place of compassion, because I know there's some part of many of them that is genuine and they do think they're doing the right thing. I probably have more anger towards leaders who blend it with capitalism, who use it as a tool of manipulation,
Right.
and then weaponize it to actually sow division and create hate for their own economic gain. And this is, again, the history of, unfortunately, I mean, whether you're talking about the Roman Catholic Church or Christianity as it's been in America, like there's so
Right.
much of it's tied to it.
Well, I think also like knowing, I think one of the other things that I kind of had to knock over was where is evil in the world? Where does evil exist in the world? Right. And if you believe, and this is a me thing, right? So like I understand this comes out of like my open process theology. Like I know where this is coming from, but like if you believe that people are inherently evil, it can be really easy to just say like screw you all, like I hate you, I don't want anything to do with your Jesus, your church, right? But if you believe that people are inherently good and that they have that genuine nature, right? And they're in a system that's broken, it's a lot easier to begin to speak. I like to say that I like to speak the language of evolution, not actual evolution, but like of personal evolution, to say like, hey, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at that system, right? Like, and I'm gonna call that system out, and I'm gonna try to like love you in the process and pull you into what I'm seeing. And so, yeah, I think that it's you hit it there, like to try and be able to enter those spaces and understand like people aren't sharing as much as I hate it. They're not sharing this thing in the military because they, you know, because there's some there's somewhere along the line there is a genuine belief that we are ushering in God into this conflict, right? And so like somewhere along that line, we have to call out the problem, and the problem is the thought pattern and not necessarily the person.
I
I mean,
really think that's like one of our most sacred callings right now as progressive Christians is like noticing, for me at least, is like noticing my rage, noticing when I start to become very bitter towards people.
Yeah.
And Dr. Carter does this hand motion a lot where he's like, take that feeling and reflect. If you're just listening, it's like he pinches the air and then he like like U-turns it into his heart. And I've been doing that hand motion when I feel the hatred, but more in a way of what is the bigger thing behind this that I am angry at, because it's not this person who I believe to be a child of God and a reflection of God. It is the thing that is causing this to happen.
Right.
But I just think you articulated that so well. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for
Yeah. We
putting that
share a
into words.
faith. We share a faith with MAGA Christians. I want everyone to hear that. We share a faith with MAGA Christians. We are in the same faith system, and we just have to find a way. Repentance does not come through anger, it comes through kindness. Repentance comes through the kindness of God. If we can reflect that kindness, that's where we're going to see real change in our country and in our nation, and in our states and our cities, is not through keyboard jockeys and responding to bots. It's going to be at the bar, at the coffee shop, when someone shows up in their Pick Jesus t-shirt and they're telling me about how God's going to condemn the gays and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to lovingly enter that conversation with them, because that's the language of repentance.
yeah, if you aren't watching on YouTube and you watch this, you guys see Wesley's face when Joanna says that we should I know you well enough to be like, I know that's gonna be like, because I mean it's true, and yet we know that. I think this is one of the reason why we can talk about Christianities and the plurality and way in which we practice, because this is the way in which communities have understood Christianity at its core to be a spiritual path of radical compassion that leads towards liberation, right? And when it is weaponized in that way, and it stifles growth and stifles community, like these people are who believe that are honestly hurting themselves and others. And I think that's what can make it so difficult. And we're not saying everybody needs to have these conversations or everybody needs to engage someone, but I do think it's helpful for me to look at things from a more historical perspective to see the times when people have gotten it wrong. I think the challenge is we're in an era where some people never want to do that self-reflection to be able to grow. I want to make sure we pivot to get into some of the politics of the conversation today, because I think that's also, I mean, as you talked about, how do we understand evil? I think sin, and a terrible definition of sin, is a part of the reason why you see these divisions in the way in which some groups of folks individualize sin versus seeing sin as structural, not just individual, right? But also like, as we define it in the loft, like a sin is a failure to bother to love. And while that love is both loving yourself, but also loving your neighbor, and when we love our neighbors also includes the systems within which we live. And so I think it's a helpful turn for us to then think about, okay, how does our faith shape our politics? What does it actually look like? And so I'm curious, if you could just say a little bit more about, like, or I guess to kind of start the conversation on that, like what motivated you to run for office? Like what made you to be like, okay, this is something I'm going to do. This sounds like a good idea.
Oh my gosh. How much time do you have? This was never on my bingo card. Running for office was never something I thought about doing, but I had come out and I was doing LGBTQ rights advocacy within religious spaces. So I've been traveling around the state to other states, speaking at churches, sharing my story, basically pastoring queer people around the country, working with pastors who were evangelical pastors trying to come out and trying to figure out how they were going to navigate their lives. This was the work I was doing. And in the process of doing all of that stuff, I had done a podcast, all this stuff, just trying to make sure that this message was going forward, that you're not alone. And in the process, I got invited to speak at the first Indivisible, did the first Hands Off rally. I got invited to speak, and the organizers called me like, well, we're trying to find 2 more speakers. We're trying to find somebody to talk about LGBTQ rights and to talk about Christian nationalism. I'm like, friends, I'll do both of those for you. I got you. Like, check. And so, I shared my story with them, and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, we would love to have you speak. So I get up and speak, right? Like, there's all these politicians there doing their stump speeches and, F Trump and all this stuff everywhere, all the place. And I come up and I share my story, and I share about how my faith has been appropriated by those flying a flag. And that was kind of the basis of my talk. And the crowd, I was like thousands of people, like the crowd was moved by the speech. And I got off this, to use a stage would be very liberal. It was literally a milk crate I was standing on with a microphone, but like I stepped down literally off my soapbox, and people started coming up to me and they were like, you need to run for something. And I'm like, no thanks. I'm not sure if that's like what I want to do, but that conversation just kept happening like all day that day. And then I kept getting messages from people and people in public. Like I would go out and I would meet some friends. I'm like, you need to run for something, Joanna. Like you need to do it. And I'm like, I don't know. So I started to think like, well, maybe I should. Like the people were calling me to lead. I'm like, so maybe I should look into it. So I'd start looking around, like what's going on our city level, what's going on here or there, and wasn't really thinking about some state things. And my state representative, who is a Democrat, did 2 things. He refused to issue driver's licenses to immigrants. He voted against it. And then he also voted against trans rights in the state of Michigan. And that was the moment he was a Democrat. I said, that's the seat I'm going to run for. And I was getting ready to challenge him, and he decided to run for a different seat. So it's an open seat now. But I was motivated by the egregious civil rights issues we're seeing in our community. But what's so interesting is how similar running for office and being a politician is to pastoring.
I knew it.
I started.
I can see it. I can see it. I mean, I can see it.
Yep.
I'm so glad you said it.
Yeah. Like the more that I'm going into this, the more familiar it feels. And I'm realizing that there are folks that get into politics who don't know how to do what pastors do. What are we trained at? We're trained at listening to the cries of the people and acting, even if they can't put words to it. And that's something that I'm finding about this space that's so exciting and so it feels like a spiritual act to step into this space. And so the more I stepped into it, the more I felt like, okay, this feels like what I should be doing. And my mom's hilarious, right? She always has a lot of opinions about what I should be doing in my life, but she said to me, "You were made to do this." And that was like a huge moment of like, "Oh, okay, we'll keep going. Let's keep doing this," you know? So that's what pushed me into it. It really was kind of the universe just willing it into existence.
I think that's a really amazing, like, politicians and pastors having similar roles. I think the first time I heard that, I was thinking maybe that is saying something about pastors that's kind of
Yeah.
strange. But then I think that kind of the inverse of that is that it feels like a good politician should be serving the people as a pastor. I think that it's
Right.
really amazing to hear that this is your journey and this is the role you're stepping into, because it sounds like you are treating it with the reverence that it actually deserves. And I
Right.
think in a similar way that a good pastor and a good politician are serving similar roles, and a bad pastor and a bad politician are also similarly can fall into corruption.
Yeah.
So I think
When you're
that's a really
motivated by
amazing parallel.
money, yeah, when you're
Mhm.
motivated by money and butts in the seats, it becomes obvious over time, right? But when you're motivated by caring for people and the things they struggle with, that makes all the difference. Your church might be smaller, your bank account might be smaller, but the work is impactful and it's meaningful to those that it touches.
Wesley, I was actually going to let you get to that last question, just so we know we have time to get to the good news.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people think about how they can have an impact in their community or nationwide. So if there's someone listening to this podcast that's debating on if they should run for public office, what advice would you give them?
This is something that you have to really weigh carefully. I'll give some context. I am running for office in a state that has never once elected a trans woman to the state house. There has never been a trans elected official in our region, in our district called Downriver. There's never been a trans elected official. I deal with some really unique things getting into this. My number 2 campaign expense is armed security because of all the death threats that I get, right? Like that is the reality. You have to really weigh some of these things. But the big question I would encourage people to ask is, one, what do the people need? And are leaders listening to them? Right? I think that's the first place to start in our community. You know, I've been an LGBTQ rights advocate. The people in my district are not asking for an LGBTQ rights advocate, right? They aren't. They're wanting somebody to help them get their water bills down. They're wanting somebody to help get their electric bills. They want someone to voice concern about AI data centers coming in to one of our cities in our district. We're fighting it right now. They're looking for a voice and they're looking for somebody who listens and cares. And so ask yourself that question. Can you hold the load and the weight of the people's cries? And can you act? And that's where I think we start. And then surround yourself by people that are way better than you. I think that I think about that all the time. And sometimes when I'm, because I'm a newbie in politics, right? Everyone's like, don't make anyone feel like, don't degrade yourself, blah, blah, blah. I'm not degrading myself. I really do believe it is a key leadership principle to surround yourself by people who are intimidatingly better than you. My campaign manager, is amazingly talented, and I could never ever in a million years do what he does. My field director is super smart, and like, these people could sit in the role I'm in at any point, right? I would say make sure you're surrounding yourself. And then if you are coming from a spiritual angle, just make sure that you're continually filling yourself. Like, you're going to need it, whatever that looks like. Now, what I'm not saying is make sure you read your Bible every day. Like that's I'm not like saying you need to check off a spiritual list, but you need to find those ways to make sure that your spirit is strong, because doing this, half of your city's going to hate you, right? Half of them's really going to not like you just because there's a D or an R next to your name, right? And so, like, which is totally unfair and a huge flaw in our systems. But just ask yourself those questions. But the number one thing is make sure you're listening to people and acting on what they need and not what you want and need. I have a foundation of civil rights in my campaign. I will never in a million years bend or change my mind on those things, and I will show up and fight for those things. But I'm leading with the things that people are asking me to do, and anywhere else, fighting for those things as best I can.
I think what we've seen take over our politics, particularly on more conservative circuits, but to an extent, even in the democratic spaces, is a shift to giving people psychological benefits rather than material benefits, right? And so that's where you get the language of culture wars, or just saying certain things, or political gestures that don't really tangibly offer anything. And because of the history of the way race has been weaponized in this country, like that offering of the psychological wages of whiteness in particular has been a useful cudgel for white Americans, right? To suffer from so many things, but to know that because of the psychological wages of whiteness, you're better off than other people. And I think the difference that what I know you're trying to do in our conversations is to recognize that the way you confront that is to talk about the material benefits that people actually can tangibly get. So that way they are less concerned with the letter that's next to the name. Because I come from a time in a place in Michigan where we were purple, and like, you were, just because somebody was Republican didn't mean that they hated you. Like, they actually still try to do a good thing. And I mean, I know I speak like this old man sometimes, and I'm like, it's not that long ago. I'm talking about like the late 80s, early 90s. Like, it wasn't great, but they weren't also trying to dehumanize you. And I think meeting those material needs and actually listening to people, like, I know that poverty, I know that suffering, like, because these are spaces that I was around. And so I guess I just want to say, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being brave enough to speak and to step into this role. Because not like there's a part of me that has always thought, oh, this is one way I can make a change. And then the more logical, reasonable part of me that wants to stay married is like, nah, you can't do this, dog. Like, this ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work, because of the cost, right? I'm so grateful that you are doing this in a state that for me still feels like home, among people that I genuinely care about. And so thank you for doing what you do. I don't know, Everest, Wesley, if there's anything y'all want to say.
If I could just reply to that, first, I think it's really important, and we'll probably get to this, like, how can you support all that stuff? But like, I think it's really important for folks to know that, like, there are progressive Christians coming. Like, we're gonna get there. We're gonna be there in the houses, in the senates, fighting against this egregious use of our faith on house floors. Like, these disgusting prayers we hear in the invocations, these bills that come across and they use the name of Jesus to try and take your driver's licenses away. Like, we are going to fight back, and we're going to use this liberationist theology to do it. And it's because we're equipped with that, like, that we're going to make our state safer for ourselves, and then for everyone else to follow that as well.
That's awesome. Everest, Wesley, I want to make sure I gave y'all space to say anything else before we wrap up.
No, I mean, just thank you for sharing your story and your perspectives. It's I mean, it's always encouraging to see new leadership and new bold leadership sort of stepping into their power and fighting for the people around them. I think that's just so inspirational.
I mean, and I'm sure that you know this, but I think I feel really moved hearing you speak. I mean, just since I was a kid, the cultural shift around queerness has been so intense and beautiful and amazing. And like, I keep thinking about how just even seeing someone like you on the local news would have just been life-changing. I think that so much pain comes from just queer identity being invisible to young people, and even though we are in a time of really intense anti-queer
Yeah.
ideology, it is also a time of a lot of visibility, and it is just really beautiful that you are doing what you're doing. And I think for every death threat and every person that is outraged, there are at least 5 queer people out there that are feeling seen and represented for the first time.
Yeah.
I think especially young people, which is really important. And
Yeah.
again, I'm sure people tell you that all the time, but feels important to name here.
Thank you. Yeah. And for anybody that's been listening, like I don't know if I probably just skipped the question, but like if you hear this, no matter where you're at, like you can support us. You can support this work. You can go to our website. I'm sure we can link it or whatever. I don't know if I'm inviting myself into your links.
It'll be linked.
Oh, we
It'll
will.
be linked.
Oh, we
It'll be
absolutely
linked.
will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So please
Okay.
tell people
Yeah.
how they can support you and connect to you.
Yeah, you can go to joannawhaley.com, and right there you can donate to the campaign if you would like. That is a big thing. I think it's really important to say I'm running in a primary with men who have deep pockets and are trying to buy their way into these seats. They put in a combined $60,000 of their own money, which is more money than I made in my annual salary last year. So, we could use your support to make sure that the momentum we have is going to make a difference and make history here in the state. And, just know that no matter where you are, if you live in the state of Michigan and you're hearing my voice and you don't live in my district and you don't feel represented, I've got you. I'm going to represent you. If you're a queer person across the country and you live in Kansas, I just wrote a nasty gram to all of your representatives this week. And some of them got back to me, right? Like, we're going to fight for you. And you've got a voice, and we're going to fight this thing from the inside, but we do need your support in doing that. So go to joannawhaley.com and support our campaign.
Awesome. Well, Joanna, thanks for joining us. Like I said, we're so delighted to have you. And we want to wrap up as we have been trying to do recently with some good news. And we'll make these some quick hitters. Ticketmaster, Lord willing, will collapse because it is a monopoly that is ridiculous. If you like live music, at some point in my life, I used to do this before I had a kid, but less live music now. But there's a lawsuit against Ticketmaster that's going forward. Attorney generals of New York and 38 other states, plus Washington, D.C., claim the entertainment conglomerate dominates live event markets. And so basically it's trying to lead to the breakup of the Live Nation, like a monopoly on the live entertainment industry, which I think is like really, really important for artists and for creatives to actually be able to make money. And there's some interesting stuff happened with Spotify too, which is maybe another podcast we can get into at some point. FedEx also, they are issued a class action lawsuit on behalf of customers, and they're trying to get the tariff money back. So basically, FedEx has said if they win this lawsuit from getting the tariff money, they're going to issue refunds to customers. And hopefully we can use this as a leverage point for people to actually get the money back that the Trump administration has just literally stolen. And lastly, the Democratic turnout in Tuesday's Texas primary reached record levels. There's also complications with that. For those of you in Texas, we are going to talk about it because we know what happened in Dallas County. Like there's definitely some things that aren't great, but we're going to get into it on another episode. But Joanna, again, thank you for joining us. And I just want to thank you all for listening to the Progressive Christian Podcast. The Progressive Christians Podcast is a ministry of The Loft, a worship community of Westwood United Methodist Church. If you would like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at The Progressive Christians. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you at The Progressive Christians, theloftla.org. Our show is produced by our amazing producer, Spencer. Shout out to Spencer, and is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, AJ, who always does the heavy lifting. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And thanks for listening, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.